So for those of us at the leading edge, then it's the second part of all this, of what I've been speaking about this morning, has to do with giving up or transcending the false belief that such a place as heaven, some place where you will experience perfect happiness and freedom from pain and fear, exists in somewhere in your metaphysical, post-physical future. And it's a real big one to give up. You know, even for sophisticated people. Because if you start thinking, you know, about the human experience from an evolutionary perspective, it really doesn't make any sense. Because think about this: if we are all individually and collectively part and parcel of a developmental process that started 14 billion years ago, from nothing came something, energy, light, matter, life, mind, and consciousness, and ultimately self-reflective awareness, this capacity for interiority, or capacity for consciousness, is part and parcel and as a result of the evolution of the material universe. Right? You can't separate one from the other, you know. Right? So the capacity for interiority, which is the capacity for consciousness, is inextricably intertwined with the evolution of the material cosmos. Right? It's one thing. It's one process. It's not two. Is that clear? So, as we can look up in the sky and begin to appreciate that our physical form is a product of the first cause in the Big Bang and the elements that were produced as a result of that initial explosion and many cosmic collisions that happened afterwards, we can realize that our physical form, the matter of our physical form, is a product of that. So is our capacity for interiority, or our capacity for consciousness itself. In other words, the capacity for consciousness that you have right now, that I'm experiencing, you're experiencing, even this intersubjective event that's happening at the level of consciousness between us now, the very experience of consciousness that you have, the experience of being aware right now, the experience of cognition, of awareness, of intersubjective engagement that's occurring in this very moment, is a product of and has been produced by the first cause itself, which initially appeared to be merely a material event. But the material event eventually, right, gave rise to interiority. The capacity for interiority, apparently, and according to some thinkers, it makes sense, was there in some way, shape, or form from the very beginning. But now it's developed and it's evolved and it's developed to evolve. But it's very important that you begin to appreciate that your own capacity for consciousness in this very moment is inextricably intertwined with, part and parcel of, the evolution of the material cosmos. It's one event. So, as this capacity for consciousness has been produced by the process, this, assuming we don't do ourselves in, you know, assuming we make this big leap, which we have to make, which is a big assumption. But if we do, you know, get through this next big hurdle, just because your physical body is going to fall away or drop away, doesn't necessarily mean the non-physical dimensions or the more subtle dimensions of who you are as evolving consciousness are going to completely disappear or decompose. Because the process is developing. And to whatever degree you awaken to the process and become aware of it, and ultimately even take responsibility for it, which is what this teaching is about, and ultimately even take responsibility for it and become the leading edge or leading tip of it. The leading tip of the drive to become, and of course at its most interior level, is the strive towards consciousness, is the urge towards consciousness itself. Because your physical form would dissipate doesn't mean anything's going to happen to that impulse. And to whatever degree you awaken to that impulse and become one with it, is the degree to which you actually become it. Now that impulse is immortal. It doesn't seem to have died. It's been 14 billion years and it's going stronger, isn't it? Yes. It's gaining strength. So that the impulse itself is immortal. So all the ways that we have evolved in ways that are not merely physical are not going to cease simply because the body drops. So what I'm trying to say is that the whole notion of heaven is this whole time-oriented process comes to an end, and then you are supposed to enter in some static heaven realm where all development ceases for eternity. But you see, in an evolutionary or developmental way of thinking or context, it doesn't make any sense at all. Because the process is continuing. And as the process is continuing at the lowest material level, it's also continuing at the highest or its most interior level, and as it has been, so it will continue to do so. Right? Which means actually we're just getting started. From an evolutionary point of view, in terms of the evolution of consciousness, in terms of matter awakening and becoming conscious of itself, the process is really just getting going. And you say, gee, after 14 billion years you can say it's just getting going. Well, you can say, well, from a mere mortal perspective or human perspective, 14 billion years is a literally inconceivable amount of time. The mammalian brain can't conceive of what 14 billion years actually is. Just wow. But just because the human brain doesn't have the capacity to cognize that amount of time, what it really means, that doesn't, 14 billion years for God, meaning the energy and intelligence that initiated the creative process, is nothing.